Imagine coming home early, your heart racing with excitement, your suitcase still warm from the journey, only to open your bedroom door and find the person you trusted most, tangled in the sheets with someone else. This is the story of Amani Kamau, a woman whose world shattered in a single breath. But instead of screaming, she smiled, because in that moment she decided that her revenge to her cheating husband would be colder, smarter, and far more devastating than his betrayal. The night Amani Kamau came home early, the city was still awake. Nairobi's streets hummed beneath the tires of the taxi as if nothing in the world was about to change, as if a storm wasn't quietly rising inside the woman in the back seat. She watched familiar buildings flicker past, her reflection ghosting against the glass. Amina was a woman who had built everything with discipline and heart. At 32, she was a senior executive, briefcase heavy with deals signed in Dubai, suitcase packed with gifts she knew Kwame would love. But beneath all the ambition, she was still a wife, and she missed her husband, missed the way he teased her when she was tired, missed the way he insisted on cooking even when he burned the rice, missed falling asleep next to the same heartbeat every night. She'd told Kwame she would be back the next morning. But tonight she had boarded an earlier flight, eager to surprise him, to fall into his arms, to taste home again. She had even bought his favorite pastries from the airport cafe, tucked neatly beside her laptop bag. He'll never see it coming, she thought, her heart beating faster with every street she passed. The taxi rolled to a stop outside the small gated compound they called home. She tipped the driver, pulled her luggage out, and inhaled the familiar scent of jacaranda flowers drifting through the cool night air. Everything looked exactly the same, the flickering porch light, the clay pot by the door, and yet something felt off. It was subtle at first. The house was darker than usual, only a faint light spilling from the bedroom window. The front door, which Kwame always double-locked, was shut but not latched, and when she placed her hand on the knob, her heartbeat did something strange. It skipped, then hammered. Inside, the air was warm, heavy, and oddly sweet, like scented candles she didn't remember lighting. Her heels clicked softly against the wooden floor as she stepped in, suitcase wheels whispering behind her. Amina's eyes darted around. Everything was neat, too neat, like someone had tidied up quickly. She placed the pastry box on the counter and whispered into the silence, "Kwame." There was no answer. It wasn't unusual. He could be asleep upstairs, and the idea of waking him up with a kiss made her heart flutter. She set the pastry box on the kitchen counter. However, something gnawed at her. She couldn't help but notice how the house felt familiar, too familiar, comfortable in all the ways home should be, and yet beneath that comfort, a strange current hummed. She couldn't name it, didn't even try, because tonight was meant to be simple, a wife returning home to surprise her husband, and in that innocence, that perfect, ordinary moment, the first quiet thread of fate had already begun to pull. Amina rolled her suitcase down the hallway, humming softly to herself. The house was quiet, too quiet maybe, but she brushed the thought away. It had been a long trip. She was probably just overthinking. She paused by the console table near the stairs and smiled at the framed wedding photo. They looked so young there, his hand on her waist, her head resting against his chest. 5 years already, she whispered, tracing the glass with her finger. But when she looked up again, a small frown crept onto her face. The hallway light was on. Kwame never left that light on. Strange. And then she set her suitcase by the stairs and listened carefully. The house wasn't silent after all. Somewhere upstairs, the faint hum of music played, low, unfamiliar, almost hidden. "Maybe he's still awake," she murmured, smiling again, though her voice sounded less certain this time. But then, just before climbing the stairs, something else caught her eye, a pair of high heels tucked halfway under the console table. They weren't hers, they were too shiny, too new. Her heart skipped once, then twice. She stared at them for a moment, frozen in place. 1,000 excuses ran through her mind, a cousin visiting, or maybe a friend stopped by, but none of them made sense. Kwame hadn't mentioned anyone. Meanwhile, in the dimly lit bedroom upstairs, Kwame froze mid-kiss. "Did you hear that?" he whispered, glancing toward the door. His chest was still rising fast, sweat beading along his hairline. The woman lying across his bed, tall, curvy, wrapped in nothing but a silk robe, smiled lazily and tugged him back toward her. "Relax," she purred, dragging her nails along his chest. "It's probably the wind." Kwame swallowed hard. The guilt churned in his stomach like acid. "No, no, I heard something," he said again, but his voice was weaker now. Her lips brushed his ear, then stopped listening, and just like that, his resistance melted. The music kept playing, soft, sensual, as her hands slid lower, pulling him deeper into a sin he'd promised he'd never commit. Downstairs, Amina was staring at the unfamiliar pair of heels by the console table. Her heartbeat had turned into a drum. Every step up the staircase felt heavier, louder. The closer she got, the clearer the sounds became. A muffled laugh, a whispered moan, the soft thud of a bed frame shifting. Her breath caught. "No," she whispered, shaking her head as if denial could rewind time, but her trembling hand still reached for the doorknob. With one swift push, the door swung open, and the world stopped. Kwame jerked upright, eyes wide with shock. The woman beside him gasped, clumsily pulling the bedsheet over her bare shoulders. Amina stood frozen in the doorway, suitcase still in hand, her face drained of color. For a long, terrible moment, no one spoke. Only the music played on, a cruel, mocking soundtrack to the scene she was never supposed to see. Amina didn't cry. She didn't shout. She just stood there, the dust of her journey still clinging to her coat, staring at the man she had once trusted with every beat of her heart. "Amina, Amina," Kwame stammered, his voice barely a whisper. This isn't." She raised a hand, just one finger, and the room fell silent again. "Don't," she said quietly. The calmness in her voice was more terrifying than any scream. "Don't say a word." The woman in the bed fumbled with the sheet, eyes wide and trembling. I should go," she murmured. Amina's gaze slid toward her, cold and unblinking. "Yes," she said. "You should." The woman bolted from the bed, grabbing her dress and heels in a frantic rush. She avoided Amina's eyes as she slipped past her, disappearing down the hallway like a ghost. Now, only the two of them remained. Kwame swung his legs off the bed, still half-dressed, still lost for words. "Amina, listen to me." "I am listening," she interrupted, still standing in the doorway. "I just haven't heard anything worth my time yet." Her voice was steady, but her chest was rising and falling too quickly. Inside, a storm was brewing. Betrayal, disgust, heartbreak, but she held it all in a deadly, chilling silence. Was she worth it? She asked suddenly. Her voice cracked just slightly on the last word. Was she worth everything we built? Kwame's mouth opened, then closed again. He had no answer. Amina shook her head slowly, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "I left my heart with you when I boarded that plane, and you left yours with someone else in our matrimonial bed." She turned away before he could see the tear threatening to fall. "Get dressed," she said, her voice low but sharp as glass. "We're not done talking." "Not yet." The house felt colder now, the air heavier. Even the ticking of the wall clock seemed louder than usual. Amina sat at the edge of the couch, coat still on, suitcase still by her feet. Across from her, Kwame paced back and forth, bare feet against the polished floor, desperation in every movement. "Amina, please," he started, his voice breaking. It wasn't what it looked like. She tilted her head, eyes never leaving his face. "Then explain it to me," she said softly. "Tell me what I thought I saw." Kwame stopped pacing. His chest rose and fell. "I made a mistake. I was lonely. You were gone for weeks. One thing led to another. And you ended up in bed with someone else." She finished for him, just like that. Silence. He ran a trembling hand over his head. "I regret it. Every second of it. She means nothing to me. You're my wife, my life, I swear." Amina let out a dry, hollow laugh. "You swear? You swore before God, Kwame. Remember. For better or worse. Was this the worst part?" Her voice wasn't angry. Not yet. It was steady, deliberate, like someone dissecting a wound to understand how deep it went. "I'll fix it," he said. "I'll do anything. I'll cut her off. I'll go to therapy. Just don't give up on us." She looked at him, this man who once felt like home, and for a split second her chest tightened. But it wasn't love anymore. It was something colder. "You know what's funny?" she whispered. "You're terrified of losing me, but you already did." Kwame's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" "I mean," she said, standing and picking up her suitcase, "I'm not leaving. Not tonight, not tomorrow, maybe not for a while, but things will never be the same again, because one day, when you least expect it, you'll understand exactly how betrayal feels." She walked past him, calm, composed, unreadable, and disappeared down the hallway, leaving him kneeling on the living room floor, drowning in the weight of his own guilt. Upstairs, behind the closed bedroom door, Amina finally allowed herself to cry. But even through the tears, her mind was working, piecing together a plan that would break his heart far more quietly, far more painfully than he had ever broken hers. The morning sun crept gently through the curtains, spilling golden light over a house that no longer felt like home. The silence was strange, not heavy like last night's, but delicate and dangerous, like the pause before a blade strikes. Kwame stirred awake on the couch, his neck aching from where he'd fallen asleep, begging the night before. The events replayed in his mind, the door opening, Amina's eyes, the silence and her words. His chest tightened. Please let this not be the end. Then he smelled something that made his heart stumble. Coffee. Fresh, strong and familiar. He rose, following the scent into the kitchen, and froze. Amina was there, still in her travel clothes, hair tied back, humming softly as she sliced mangoes into a bowl. The calm in her face was unnatural, too still, too composed. "Good morning," she said without turning around. Kwame blinked, unsure how to respond. "Amina, coffee's ready," she interrupted gently, "and I made breakfast. Sit." He did, cautiously, like a man stepping into a trap. She set the cup in front of him and sat opposite, stirring her tea as if nothing had happened. "I didn't sleep much," she said quietly. "I kept thinking about us, about everything we've built together." His eyes searched hers, desperate for a sign. Anger, sadness, anything. But there was only that unsettling calm. "And?" he asked, voice trembling. "And I realized." She set her cup down slowly. "It would be too easy to throw it all away, too easy to storm out and never come back. But that's not who I am, Kwame." Relief flashed across his face. "Then you'll give me a chance. You'll let me." "I didn't say that." Her voice sharpened like a knife's edge. "I said I won't make it easy for you, not for a single day." He stared, confused. "What does that mean?" Amina smiled, the kind of smile that chills a man's spine. "It means I'm staying. We'll eat breakfast, we'll laugh, we'll go to dinners, we'll look perfect, and every night you'll go to sleep, not knowing what's coming next." Kwame swallowed hard. "Amina, but one thing is certain," she continued, leaning forward. "You will never be at peace again, not until I decide you've felt what I felt and more." The room fell silent again, but this time the silence wasn't empty. It was full of power, of vengeance, of something far more dangerous than rage. And as Amina stood, gathering her dishes with eerie serenity, one thought burned behind her calm eyes: the game has just begun. It was almost unsettling how normal things looked. 3 days had passed since that night. 3 long, heavy days. And yet to anyone watching from the outside, nothing seemed broken. Amina still cooked dinner. She still folded his shirts. She even laughed, a small, deliberate laugh at his attempts to make conversation. Kwame clung to this illusion like a drowning man to driftwood. He told himself she was forgiving him, that maybe things could go back to how they were. He didn't see the distance in her eyes when he spoke. He didn't notice how carefully she watched his every movement. "Dinner's ready," she called out one evening, setting plates on the table as he walked in from work. "Smells amazing," he said with a nervous smile. It's nice us sitting like this again." She smiled back, soft, reassuring, practiced. "Of course, we're married, aren't we?" The words melted the knot in his chest. And as he reached across the table to hold her hand, he felt something he hadn't felt in days: hope. But Amina wasn't thinking about hope. She was thinking about passwords, about the bank statements he'd left carelessly on his desk, about the unfamiliar perfume that still lingered faintly on his blazer when he got home late. She was building a puzzle, a slow, methodical puzzle that would one day bury him. And the first piece slid quietly into place when she excused herself from the table, locked herself in the bathroom, and photographed every financial document she'd found in his briefcase. The plan had begun, and Kwame, poor oblivious Kwame, didn't even know he was already losing. Nights became her secret hours. When Kwame fell asleep, peaceful and convinced that their marriage was healing, Amina would slip quietly out of bed, pad barefoot to the study, and begin her hunt. The first few nights were simple: copied emails, photos of receipts, screenshots of messages half deleted but still recoverable from his laptop's trash folder. But by the fourth night, the picture forming on her screen was darker than she ever expected. It started with a name. The woman Sophia wasn't just a fling, she'd been around for months. Amina scrolled through dinner reservations, weekend hotel bookings, and worse, expensive jewelry orders shipped to an apartment address she didn't recognize. Her stomach twisted, but she didn't stop. Next, she opened the shared financial folder he didn't know she had access to. Numbers danced across the screen, transfers she didn't authorize, withdrawals too frequent to ignore. And then one transaction made her hand freeze. A monthly payment to a private account, labeled as consulting. Consulting. She clicked deeper. It wasn't consulting, it was rent. Kwame had been paying for Sophia's apartment. Her heartbeat was steady now, calmer than it should have been. Rage was gone, pity was gone, only focus remained. She copied every document, saved every screenshot, organized every detail. The next morning, Kwame kissed her cheek before leaving for work. "I'll be late tonight, love." "A meeting," he said. "Of course," she replied sweetly. "Don't work too hard." But as soon as the door closed, Amina slipped into a blazer, grabbed her phone, and headed out. She had one more piece to confirm, and she knew exactly where that meeting really was. The next morning, sunlight slipped through the curtains, painting soft gold across Amina's face. No one looking at her now, humming softly as she flipped pancakes and set the table, would have guessed that 2 nights ago she had found her husband tangled in another woman's arms. Her smile was calm, even tender, as Kwame walked into the kitchen, still half asleep and guilty beneath his polished charm. "Good morning, love," she said sweetly, sliding a plate toward him. "I made your favorite." Kwame blinked, suspicious. She should be angry, she should be crying, but here she was, acting as if nothing had happened. The guilt gnawed at him, but the relief was stronger. Maybe it was over. Maybe she would forgive and forget. Amina leaned across the table and brushed a kiss on his cheek. "We should go out this weekend, just us, like old times." He chuckled nervously. "Yeah, sure, that'd be nice." But behind her soft eyes, a storm was building. Every moment of kindness was a mask. Every laugh, every gentle touch, part of a plan. She wasn't trying to save their marriage. She was building her cover. By the time Kwame realized what was coming, it would be too late. In that kitchen, over coffee and false smiles, Amina swore an unspoken vow. He had broken her heart. Now she would break his world. That night, when Kwame's breathing fell into the heavy rhythm of sleep, Amina's eyes stayed open. She stared into the darkness, not with sadness, but with icy, focused purpose. The woman who once prayed for his happiness now plotted his downfall, step by careful step. It started with his phone. She moved like a shadow through the bedroom, every movement rehearsed in her mind. The passcode, his mother's birthday, how predictable. Message after message poured into her eyes. One message read, "Last night was unforgettable. Can't wait for our next trip." Amina's heart didn't break this time. It hardened. She screenshotted everything. Texts, photos, even voice notes, sending them quietly to a hidden email account. A sharp breath escaped her lips. "You fool," she whispered. "You thought I'd never see this." By dawn, she had a collection thick enough to ruin his reputation, his career, and his lover's life in one blow. She even took photos of the necklace he once claimed he couldn't afford, the same one now glinting around the mistress's neck in a selfie. And when the morning light crept into the room, Amina was already back under the covers, curled beside him, playing the role of the loving wife. He stirred, kissed her forehead, and left for work, blissfully unaware that his downfall now lived in her inbox. Step 1 was done. Now came the next part of her plan: make him believe he was safe, so the final strike would hurt twice as much. The plan didn't begin with shouting. It didn't begin with slammed doors or broken plates. It began with silence, deliberate, calculating silence. Amina's days became routine again. She cooked, laughed, kissed Kwame goodbye at the door, and even agreed to dinner dates he suggested to make things right. He thought he'd been forgiven, he thought he'd won, but behind that gentle smile, she was building his downfall piece by piece. First, she met with a lawyer, discreetly, over coffee at a quiet cafe downtown. "I want everything that is legally mine," she said calmly, sliding a thick envelope across the table. Inside were printed emails, screenshots, bank transfers, enough to turn any divorce case into a guaranteed victory. Next came the bank. With quiet precision, she moved her salary, savings, and even the joint account balance into a new account under her name alone. Every cent she had helped build, she now safeguarded. Then she visited her old friend at the Revenue Authority. "This company's accounts look interesting," Amani said, handing over evidence of Kwame's suspicious transfers. Her friend raised an eyebrow and promised to look into it. Finally, she began the most devastating move of all, the whispers. A message here, a casual conversation there, enough for the mistress's family to start hearing rumors. Enough for Kwame's boss to question his loyalty, enough to set fire to their carefully constructed lies. By the time Kwame kissed her goodnight that evening, believing he was the luckiest man alive, the first domino had already tipped over, and Amani, she slept peacefully for the first time in months, knowing the storm was now inevitable. The morning felt wrong, too quiet, too still. Kwame shuffled out of bed, yawning, expecting to smell Amani's usual ginger tea and hear her humming in the kitchen. But the air was heavy, no sound, no scent, no trace of her warmth. He frowned. Maybe she'd gone out early, maybe she was meeting a client. But as he walked through the house, confusion turned into a cold, rising panic. The living room, empty, the walls bare. Even the photo albums, the gifts from their wedding, the handmade vase from their honeymoon, gone. "What the?" His voice cracked. He stumbled into the bedroom. Half the closet had been emptied. Her clothes, her shoes, her jewelry, all vanished. On the neatly made bed sat a single envelope with his name written in her handwriting. His hands shook as he opened it. "By the time you read this, I'll be far from here. Everything I own, everything I helped build, I've taken. Everything you owe, that's about to come knocking. Enjoy the mess you made." Kwame's breath hitched. His heart thudded in his chest. He grabbed his phone and called her. Voicemail. He called again and again. Nothing. Suddenly, his entire world felt hollow, and for the first time he wondered, had she really forgiven him, or had she just been waiting for the perfect moment to strike? By noon, the day had gone from confusing to catastrophic. Kwame walked into the office with a forced smile, trying to shake off the morning's dread. But the moment he stepped through the doors, eyes turned, whispers rippled across the room like a current. "Kwame, the boss wants to see you." "Now," his assistant muttered. Inside the conference room sat not just his manager, but a man from the Financial Crimes Unit and a stern woman from the Revenue Authority. On the table, printed bank statements, transfer records, and emails he thought no one would ever see. "Do you care to explain these unauthorized payments?" the boss asked coldly. His throat went dry. I can explain, sir." "Save it," the officer interrupted. "You're under investigation for tax evasion, fraud, and embezzlement. I'd suggest you call your lawyer." As security escorted him out, the only thought racing through his mind was how. How did they find out? How did it all come crashing down so fast? And then, like a ghost, Amina's final words from the letter echoed in his head. "Enjoy the mess you made." Evening brought one last humiliation. Kwame, desperate and furious, drove to Lindy's apartment. Maybe she'd help, maybe she still cared, but when the door opened, he froze. Inside were Lindy's parents, and her furious older brother. "You're the man who ruined our daughter's life." The brother spat. "You think we didn't hear about your married status, about the money you gave her that wasn't even yours?" Lindy's mother glared at her daughter. "We raised you better than this." Tears streamed down Lindy's cheeks. "Kwame, I'm sorry, I can't do this anymore." She shoved a box of his things into his chest and slammed the door. For the first time in his life, Kwame was truly alone, abandoned by the woman he betrayed his wife for. Days later he found her, standing outside her new apartment, a sleek sunlit place far from their old life. Kwame waited, disheveled and desperate. "Amani, please," he begged when she finally appeared. "I made a mistake. I lost everything. I need you." She looked at him for a long, silent moment. The man she had once loved with everything she had. But where there was once pain, now there was only peace. "Kwame," she said softly, "you didn't lose everything. You threw it away." And with that, she walked past him, her heels clicking against the pavement, like the final nails in the coffin of their past. Weeks later, Amani sat on the balcony of her new life, signing the final papers that would launch her dream, a small interior design studio she'd planned for years but never pursued. The sun dipped below the skyline, painting the sky in streaks of orange and gold. She took a slow, deep breath. The woman who had once cried herself to sleep over a man's betrayal was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, wiser, reborn. She raised a glass of wine to the horizon and whispered to herself, smiling, "The day I came home early was the day I was reborn."